Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Jess and this is Jess Make It, the DIY sewing channel where I thrift and sew my way to a new wardrobe. And this week we are doing a modern take on the shift. Ever since I made the 1910 wrap cape by American Duchess, I have been obsessing over historical fashion. I love the silhouette, I love the designs, everything about it. The 18th and 19th century, it's so vast, but there's so many elements of the fashion that I love, and I really want to bring forward into my modern day wardrobe. So I discovered a term called history bounding. And that's exactly what it is. It's taking elements of historical fashion and bringing them into the modern day. So my first piece that I want to do is a shift. So a shift in historical fashion would go between, would be your first layer that you put on. So what I want to do is to make a modern version of the shift. Still have a bit of the historical element to it. I want the gathers around the bust line. I'm going to put sleeves on it, but I'm going to make it a shirt. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I still wear pants from time to time, and I want to be able, if this is something that becomes a staple in my wardrobe, I want the option to be able to wear it with pants. Also, the fitting for the top half of a shift is a little bit more tricky than the bottom half. So my thought is I'll do a few mock-ups and get the top half to the point that I like it, and then I can do a full shift if I desire, because it's easier to extend and get a skirt to fit than it is to get the bodice to fit. I'm also thinking that I might do the skirt as a separate piece, just to give me more options. My skirts have multiple different lengths, and winter's coming. I want to stay warm, but that's another video. One thing that I forgot to mention before we get started is that I am following two YouTubers' tutorials to accomplish this. I am getting the pattern from Mariah Pattie's shift tutorial, and I'll put a link to this in the description. And I am doing the gusset from Morgan Donner's gusset tutorial. So each sleeve has a gusset in the armpit area, and I am following her tutorial to do that. I will leave links to both of those down below. So the first measurement I need to get is the length. Now I am not doing full length, which is typically just below the knee. I am just going to stop at my hip. And this way to traditional historical shifts have gussets down in the bottom to flare out the skirt. I'm not going to be bothering about those this time around. So in order to get my length, I am resting the top of my measuring tape at my shoulder, and I am letting it just fall down, and I'm going to look in my mirror and without bending over, because if you bend over it'll move your tape. It looks like my length is going to be 26 inches. The next measurement you will need is across your shoulders. And mine is 15.5. The next measurement you'll need is how wide you want your shoulder strap. So I am going to go a little bit wider. I'm going to go about 2.5 inches. Then you need to measure from your shoulder down to where you want the neckline to end. Now this is also, when you gather it, it will get raised up a bit, so if you make this a little longer, it's not the end of the world. So I am going to go with 7.5 inches. Now you want to measure how far down the back you want to go. This is a little bit more difficult, so I'm just going to try to guess. I have my measuring tape up at my sleeve. I'm reaching behind me, and we are going to go with, I'm going to go 5 inches. Five inches. Now you want to go around your arm and you want this to be a little snug because a gusset goes in here, so that will give you some extra room. So I am 17 inches. You need the length of your sleeve. I am going to go just midway, I think. This is an easy adjustment to make later, so that will be 9 inches. So I've written all those I've written all of those measurements down. I'm going to go ahead and start drawing this out on my paper. Okay, I don't have the greatest setup for this, so I'm hoping you guys will be able to follow along. I'm just going to use some craft paper, brown paper I use for wrapping packages. Super cheap, super easy. And the first measurement I'm going to start off with is my length, which was 26 inches. So down the center of my paper, I am drawing a line that is 26 inches long. The next that I want to work with is my shoulders. Now, my shoulders were 15.5 inches. So, depending on how much gathering you want around the neckline is how much you want to increase your shoulder width. So if you want a fairly fitted with very little gathers, you want to keep it close to your actual shoulder width. If you want lots of gathers around your bust, then you can go up to about double your shoulder width. I'm gonna go with 1.5 times my shoulder width. So my shoulder width is about 15.5 inches. Digging out the calculator. So that's about 23 inches across. Ooh. Which is the full length of this. That's not going to fit. So instead, I am going to go with, so apparently I did not draw my line down the center. So I'm going to go with 10 inches on either side, just because it will fit that way. So now I want my shoulder straps. So I'm going to go in 2.5 inches on either side. And I'm also going to be making a separate front and a separate back piece. So I want my neckline to be 7.5 inches deep. Okay, and now we need to curve off the neckline. Now, depending on how square you want your neckline, is how big of a circle that you use. I am literally using this pot, pot that I found in my room, flipping it over, and I am just going to use that because I want a fairly square neck. Oops, I guess I should have cleaned up the pot first. I want a fairly square neckline. Now, if you want an actual square neckline, that's a whole other pattern that I'm not getting into right now because it is beyond me. So now, so I'm just drawing the bottom as wide as I can make it on this paper. I was hoping it would flare out a bit more, but it is what it is. So I'm going to attach, oh, I need a longer ruler. Okay. Longer ruler. I will try to make some graphics to show this a little bit better, but whoop, this is the length, and I used my shoulder measurements here and I multiplied it not quite by 1.5. You have give in between using your actual measurements and going up to about twice. And then whoop, this line here was how far down I wanted my neckline to go, and here is the measurement for my strap. So in this area here, it's going to be all gathered, which will pull it in. So I'm going to make the back piece, and this does not include seam allowance. So that's something to keep in mind. At the straps, I have seen a lot of patterns where they extend it up a little bit and they do an overlap with the back. I'm not going to do that on this one. I'm just going to sew them normally. So just keep in mind, you do have to add seam allowance to this. There are no seam allowances. So I now have a front piece and a back piece. So you'll notice the only difference is the back piece is a little higher and the front piece is a little lower in the neckline. I did not cut out pattern pieces for the sleeves or the gusset because those are just straight up rectangles, and I will just draw them directly on my fabric and cut them from there. So now it is time to cut my fabric. So you'll need one back, one front, and 2 sleeves and 2 gussets, which the gussets are 4 inches by 4 inches without seam allowance. So here is my fabric. It is an unbleached cotton sheeting that I had actually used when we were selling our house to make curtains out of. And I brought the curtains with us in hopes that they would work somewhere here, but they didn't, and it's still good fabric, so I kept it. Now, one thing I did do is I ripped down one side, like I literally cut in a bit and ripped it. And what this does is it is showing me where the grain line is. So I want to try to line up my center line that I drew on my patterns with this grain line. That way I can make sure all of my pieces are going to hang in the same way. I'm also going to be using a water-soluble fabric pen to do all of my marking. This actually just showed up, which is perfect timing. Thank you, Amazon. Oh, also not a sponsor. So I am going to use my pattern pieces and draw out each, the front and the back, and then use my ruler to draw my 2 sleeves and my 2 gussets. So here we go. My fabric's all cut out. I have 2 sleeves, 2 gussets, a front and a back. And what I did is I used my water-soluble marker to trace out the pattern, and then I cut outside of my line to give me some seam allowance. The reason why I did this is because I can now stitch directly on this blue line to make sure that I get a good fit. I did mess up though when I first started cutting, and I cut along the blue line at the bottom hem. I think it'll be okay because I did leave a little extra length at the bottom hem. So I just did the same on both pieces, so my hemlines will line up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to serge all the edges except for the necklines, because those get folded over to make a casing, I believe. I'm pretty sure. I'll have to double check on that. So I will serge all my raw edges, and then we can actually start the actual sewing, which is pretty exciting. I am looking forward to seeing how this thing turns out. So this is my sleeve piece, and the first thing I have to do is attach the gusset. Now I am using Morgan Donner's basic gusset video to show me how to do this. And this is why I used a water-based fabric pen, or water-soluble fabric pen, to mark all my seam allowances, because it's going to make putting in this gusset a million times easier, because I have lines I can follow now. So the first step is to sew the top of the gusset to the bottom of the sleeve. So I'm going to pin this in and sew here. I will also leave a link to her video where she explains this way better than I can, because I am literally following her video as I do this. And I highly recommend watching it. So I am starting to sew right at this corner. In order to make sure that I get my needle right in where I need it to be, I am going to just turn my wheel on the side of my sewing machine and make sure that I am perfectly lined up right with that corner. And I'm going to sew all the way down to this end of the line where it meets the other seam allowance. Like that. Okay, for the second seam of the gusset, I am sewing it right sides together. With where I stopped my sewing, this seam here goes to meet along here. Okay, 2 seams down. So this is the inside of my fabric and my sleeve, and here's my gusset. So it will be attached to my bodice along this edge here. So now I can start right here where my stitch line ends and stitch the remainder of the sleeve. So now it is time to attach the sleeve to my bodice. So this is the wrong side of one of my side seams, and I have found the center of my sleeve and just put a pin in there. So I want to start by pinning the center of my sleeve to the seam of my shoulder and pin down. And I'm going to start sewing at the point right where my stitches ended, where I attached the gusset. And I'll sew all the way down both sides to the point where my gusset ended on the sleeve. So now, using the same technique that I used to attach the gusset to the sleeves, I am going to attach the gusset to the bodice. So this one will go there. So it's really difficult because all of my fabric is the same, and it's really hard to tell the front and the back to see exactly what I'm doing here. So that's why I really suggest going and looking at my description and following the tutorial I did, because she shows it really, really, really well. But I am just stitching on the last side of my gusset, and then I will stitch down my side. Okay, turtlenecks and microphones don't work well together, but hi! It's the second, no, I don't remember what day it is. It's been a couple days since I've been able to get back into my sewing room. All right, 1 second. And I haven't done any work on my shift at all. So last time we got the sleeves on with the mitered corners, and now I need to do the neckline. Because it's going to be a drawstring and I wanted it fairly narrow, I found just this really thin 1/8 of an inch ribbon I'm going to use for the drawstring. So I need to create 2 little holes in the center of the front for the drawstring to go through, and because the holes are going to be so small, I wasn't sure, like normally I would just use a safety pin, but the holes are going to be super small, so I'm going to make the holes big enough to fit my plastic yarn needle, and I'm hoping that that will work to get the ribbon through. So I do the holes, and then my hem is going to be my casing for my drawstring. I'm also going to stitch down the shoulder seams. I didn't think of this before. I think on my next one I'm going to cut it all as one big piece, because what ends up happening is once you form a casing and you're trying to get your safety pin or your needle or whatever through, what ends up happening is in the casing, sometimes it gets caught like this when you're trying to push it through, and it's a pain in the butt. So I'm just going to take a moment to stitch down both sides of the seam allowance on the shoulders, so that way when I'm pushing my yarn needle through, it'll have an easier time just going over and not getting caught and going underneath and then getting annoyed. So I was trying to think of a way of how to make the holes for my ribbon to go through, and I found this. It's for punching holes in leather and such, but I'm pretty sure it's going to work on cotton. So I folded my garment in half, and I'm just gonna grab a pin to mark where my center front is. And I don't want my holes to be very far apart, because the piece in the center is going to end up gathering up and bunching together. So I am going to try That's 1/2 inch. I'm gonna try 1/2 inch apart. And because my blue line that I drew is where I want my neckline to be, so I will end up hemming it here. So I'm putting my 2 dots below my hemline, because then when it's folded over, the casing, the 2 holes will be on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and make those holes. Okay, hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing. And full disclaimer, I have never done this before either, but from what I understand, the concept is pretty simple. You just keep stitching there you go, around the hole. I don't know how close you need to make these, but I'm assuming fairly close. It's almost like, I guess, making a buttonhole. And I might have made my holes way too big, but just keep stitching. So there you have it. 2 poorly sewed holes. Now they turned out bigger than what I was expecting. So now when I do my hem, I'm going to have to do it pretty narrow to make sure that I leave these 2 open for the I can talk. The ribbon, for the ribbon to go through. So I am going to get that. So I'm just hemming all the way around. I'm going to do a little bit more narrow, iron that, and then flip it around. Like I said, the main key is to making sure that those 2 holes stay opened. And then it's just feeding the elastic through. And you can see lots of room for my plastic needle to go through. I'm sure there's actually a special tool that you would use in this circumstance, but I don't have one. So yarn needle it is. Here is mock-up 1. Not too bad for my first try. There are a few things that I'm going to change. My sleeves are way too big. Like, way too big. And it doesn't like to stay on my shoulder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another mock-up, but I'm going to take about 2 inches out of the sleeve, and I'm going to add about 1 inch to the shoulder strap to hopefully bring it in a bit more. But other than that, I like the length. Now this isn't hemmed yet, and I have lots of ease around the hips. You can kind of get an idea, like once it fits properly. But it's not horrible, but we can do better. So I'm going to go and do everything that I just did again, but just adjusting the pattern slightly. For me, it'll be another afternoon. For you guys, it'll just be a minute. Maybe not. Maybe even just like half a second. Just wait there. I'll be right back. And here it is, version 2. All I did, like I said, was I brought the shoulder in a bit and I took a little bit out of the sleeve width. I also shortened the sleeve because I found it was hitting me in a really weird spot. But I think we've got it. Now all I need is a corset for it, which I am working on. And if you'd like to see how that's going, follow me on Instagram. But I could totally get away with wearing this as a little blouse. So I still have to hem the sleeves and the bottom, but then it's all done. I'm excited. So I'm gonna work on that graphic for you guys and get this all hemmed up, because you should all make one. It was a lot of fun. As promised, here's the graphic. I totally made this in Paint, so it's not the best, but I think it works. Now these dimensions are the ones that I use to make my shift, so they are fit to me, but hopefully you still find them helpful. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed already, please do. Don't forget to hit the like button, and we will see you next week where I will make the bottom half of this ensemble.